Racist cops. Attack a black woman. Her fierce dogs charge in before she can scream. They came under the cover of twilight, men in uniform sworn to protect, but fueled by hatred. Ebony Johnson, a dedicated nurse and dog rescuer, found herself on the receiving end of unimaginable cruelty. Her quiet life in Dallas, Texas, was torn apart when prejudice turned violent. Before she could scream for help, two faithful companions charged in with heart-stopping loyalty, forever altering the course of one fateful night. This is a story of unspeakable terror, met by unwavering courage of a single moment that unravels a web of secrets, corruption, and the raw thirst for justice. Brace yourself. Karma is coming. The late summer sun cast its golden rays across the modest suburban home where Ebony Johnson lived. A native of Dallas, Texas, Ebony was known around her neighborhood for her warm smile, her unwavering kindness, and the two dogs she had rescued from a local shelter. Everyone who passed by her tidy one-story house recognized the spirited barks of Athena and Apollo, both large shepherd mixes, brimming with the kind of joyful energy that only second chances can bring. Ebony had grown up on the outskirts of Dallas, raised by her grandmother, a resilient woman who had marched for civil rights decades before. That legacy instilled in Ebony a profound sense of justice and empathy. She spent her childhood volunteering at food drives and animal rescues, forging a path that led her to become a registered nurse. At Dallas General Hospital, her gentle bedside manner and professional expertise made her beloved among both her colleagues and her patients. That evening, as she parked her well-worn SUV in the driveway, Ebony felt the weariness of a 12-hour shift wash over her. Through the living room window, she could see Athena and Apollo pacing anxiously, tails wagging wildly at the sight of their owner. A small smile tugged at Ebony's lips. No matter how exhausted she felt, the greeting from her dogs always lifted her spirits, offering unconditional love that made the daily grind worthwhile. Inside, Ebony flipped on the lamp in the living room. The dogs rushed over, nails clicking against the wooden floor. Athena, the more protective of the two, nudged Ebony's leg insistently, as though checking to make sure she was unhurt. Apollo danced in circles around them, his tail wagging so furiously it threatened to knock over the nearest potted plant. Ebony knelt down and buried her face in their soft fur, inhaling the comforting, familiar scent of home. She warmed some leftovers, a simple chicken and rice dish, reflecting on her day. It had been hectic with the hospital corridors crowded and the air thick with tension. But Ebony carried on, focused on doing her job and caring for her patients. Her phone buzzed several times with incoming text messages, but she ignored them for the moment. Dinner and a bit of calm were all she wanted. As she ate, Ebony scrolled through the news. Another story of police brutality flashed across the screen, this one out of another state. A long C escaped her lips. She thought of her grandmother's stories, how far society had come, and how far it still had to go. Racism, hatred, and abuse of power had not disappeared. They simply shape-shifted over time, manifesting in new forms. She shook her head sadly and turned off her phone. She never suspected that by the next day, she would be living her own headline, a victim of the very prejudice she feared. For the moment, though, Ebony's world was the muted hum of the dishwasher and the playful barks of her beloved dogs. She looked forward to a good night's sleep, unaware that dark clouds were slowly gathering on her horizon, preparing to unleash a storm that would test her courage, her faith, and her very spirit. The next morning felt different. Ebony couldn't pinpoint exactly why. Maybe it was the way Athena growled softly at the window, ears perked as though detecting a presence Ebony couldn't see. Or perhaps it was the lingering dream from the night before, a jumbled vision of flashing lights and muffled cries that left her waking with a tightness in her chest. Still, Ebony had a routine to keep. She woke up, fed the dogs, and prepared for her shift at Dallas General. Halfway through combing her hair, she decided to take Athena and Apollo for a quick walk. The dogs wagged their tails excitedly as she clipped on their leashes, their entire bodies quivering with anticipation of an outdoor adventure. As they walked, the familiar path, passing neighbors offered warm greetings. Mrs. Reynolds from across the street waved while watering her begonias. Mr. Alvarez jogged by, sweat beading on his forehead, giving Ebony a quick nod. Everything seemed normal on the surface, but Ebony couldn't shake a nagging sense of apprehension. Perhaps it was residual stress from seeing those news stories last night. She forced a smile, telling herself to focus on the present. Yet as she turned the corner, she noticed a patrol car parked on the side of the road, a black and white with Dallas Police Department emblazoned on its side. 2 officers sat inside, eyes fixated on something out of view. The normalcy of seeing a patrol car in her neighborhood turned sour when she registered the hard stares directed not at criminals, but at her. She offered a polite nod and walked on. Ebony told herself not to overthink it. Dallas had its share of petty thefts and disturbances like any city. The officers could be there for any number of reasons. Still, the hair on the back of her neck prickled when the car pulled away from the curb moments later and slowly trailed her as she walked home. Once inside, Ebony peered out her front window. The patrol car passed her house, and she saw one of the officers craning his neck to get a better look. Athena let out a low growl again, as if echoing Ebony's discomfort. She brushed it off. "There's no reason to be paranoid," she whispered to herself. "They're just doing their job." Maybe it was simply a moment of hypervigilance born from reading too many traumatizing headlines. After all, Ebony had never had any direct run-ins with law enforcement, racist or otherwise. She believed, perhaps naively, that if you did nothing wrong, you had nothing to fear. But she couldn't ignore the sinking feeling in her gut, nor the dog's uncharacteristic unease. Something was off in her normally quiet corner of Dallas. She tried to shake it as she loaded her bag for work. "I'll be back soon, babies," Ebony cooed to Athena and Apollo. They whined in response, as though they didn't want her to leave. She paused at the door, a strange urgency compelling her to ensure all windows were locked, even in broad daylight. It felt ridiculous, but something told her to be extra cautious. As she double-checked everything, Ebony remembered her grandmother's words. "Always trust your instincts. They're God's way of nudging you." That subtle sense of dread followed Ebony out the door into her car and all the way to the hospital, casting a shadow on her normally optimistic spirit. Little did she know the events unfolding around her would soon erupt into a confrontation that no amount of caution could have prevented. Ebony's shift at Dallas General Hospital was particularly grueling. A rush of patients filled the emergency room, car accidents, a minor fire incident, and a wave of summertime heat stroke cases. She barely had time to breathe between triaging patients and assisting the lead physician. Yet beneath her professional exterior, a coil of anxiety tightened with each passing minute. She found herself frequently glancing at her phone, half expecting bad news, although she couldn't articulate what form that bad news might take. Around midday, Ebony's best friend and fellow nurse, Sierra Mason, noticed her distraction. During a short break, Sierra cornered her in the staff lounge. Okay, spill it. What's going on? You're jumpy as a cat in a dog park today. Ebony hesitated. She didn't want to sound paranoid, especially not to Sierra, whose sharp wit was legendary among their colleagues. I don't know, she finally said. It's probably nothing. This morning there were some cops in my neighborhood watching me a bit too closely. It just felt strange. Girl, you watch the news. Of course you'd be on edge, Sierra replied gently. It's not nothing. These are tense times. You got to be careful. Ebony nodded, relieved to have an ally who understood. They hugged quickly before returning to their patients. Her exchange with Sierra eased some of the tension, but not all of it. In the back of her mind, Ebony knew something big was lurking. She just didn't know what. Later in the afternoon, Ebony's phone buzzed in her pocket during a lull. She snuck a quick glance. It was a text from an unknown number. We need to talk. I know what's going on. Ebony's eyebrows knitted together in confusion. No name, no explanation. She ignored it, assuming it might be a wrong number or a scam. Still, it added another layer of unease, like a puzzle piece from a box she didn't recognize. When her shift finally ended, Ebony was mentally and physically exhausted. She clocked out looking forward to going home and decompressing with Athena and Apollo. Driving back, she tried to shake off the day's tension by turning up the radio and humming along to a feel-good pop tune. As she pulled into her driveway, a chill overcame her. A police cruiser was parked along the curb again, though it wasn't the same officers she'd seen earlier. Ebony parked slowly, noticing two uniformed figures inside. They appeared to be writing something on a notepad. She thought about walking up to them to ask if there was a neighborhood issue she needed to be aware of, but a nagging feeling told her to stay away. Instead, she hurried inside. The dogs greeted her with frantic tail wags, but she could sense their agitation. She peeked out the window to see if the officers would move on, but they lingered. An uneasy panic crept through her. This is more than just a coincidence, she thought. Yet Ebony had no clue why they would be watching her. She had no criminal record, no involvement with the law. For all her life, she had gone about her days believing her good intentions and good deeds were enough. That naive assumption was about to be shattered. As the patrol car finally roared away, Ebony felt certain that something dark was closing in on her once peaceful existence. The stage was set, and the players were taking their positions. All that remained was the first thunderous clap of the storm that would forever change her life. 3 days passed, each weighed down by the ominous sense that someone was stalking Ebony's every move. Patrol cars cruised by her street in increasing frequency. She spotted the same suspicious unmarked sedan parked at odd hours, its occupant barely visible behind tinted windows. Tension gripped her, and even the dogs grew restless, barking at every shadow flickering across the sidewalk. On the 4th night, Ebony returned home late from another long shift. The sun had already dipped below the horizon, cloaking the neighborhood in darkness. She parked, got out of her car, and glanced around warily. The street was still no sign of official vehicles. She exhaled a small sigh of relief. Inside the house was eerily quiet. Athena and Apollo didn't rush to meet her at the door, which was strange. Panic flared. Had something happened to them? Heart-pounding, she set her bag down and flicked on the living room lights. To her immense relief, she found both dogs in the bedroom alert and trembling slightly as though they'd sensed an intruder. She patted their heads, soothing them while scanning the room. A sudden, forceful banging on the front door shattered the silence. Ebony froze. Athena and Apollo sprang up, ears pricked and tails stiff. The pounding came again, more urgent this time. Ebony crept to the window, parting the curtains just enough to see who it was. Two uniformed police officers stood on her porch, her stomach twisted. Cautiously, Ebony opened the door a crack, leaving the chain latched. "Good evening, officers. Can I help you?" They glowered at her hands resting on their holstered guns. One was tall, broad-shouldered, with a grim set to his mouth. The other had a trimmed moustache and a jittery energy that made Ebony's heart skip a beat. "We received a complaint about suspicious activity at this address," the tall officer said. His voice was low and accusatory. "We need to come inside." "Suspicious activity?" Ebony asked. What sort of complaint was that mustache officer glanced over at his partner, then shoved the door. The chain snapped, sending Ebony stumbling backward. Athena and Apollo erupted in furious barking. Ebony's hands shook. She couldn't believe this was happening. Panic seized her. Her mind raced with thoughts of all the news stories she'd read. Unprovoked violence, unjust searches, and how quickly a minor interaction could escalate. She had done nothing wrong. Yet these officers were forcing their way into her home. "Stay back," Ebony shouted, stepping between the officers and her dogs. "You can't be here without a warrant." The tall officer sneered. "You got something to hide?" In a heartbeat, he reached for her, grabbing her arm with bruising force. Ebony let out a pained cry, feeling her heart thunder in her chest. Athena lunged forward, barking ferociously, while Apollo snarled, his hackles raised. Before Ebony could scream for help, the tall officer shoved her against the wall, pressing a knee into her back. The mustached officer brandished his baton at the dogs, eyes wild with adrenaline, and something else, fear, hatred, or both. Ebony's vision blurred with tears as she felt the crushing weight of oppression and the raw terror of being at the mercy of men who clearly didn't see her as human. At that moment, Ebony would have given anything to wake up from this nightmare. But it was real, painfully real, and the only hope she had were the two loyal creatures who sensed her peril. Little did she know that Athena and Apollo were about to make sure this unjust attack would not go unchallenged. Time slowed to an agonizing crawl as Ebony struggled to breathe. The tall officer's weight against her back made every inhale excruciating. She felt the cold press of the floor beneath her palms and the hot rush of tears against her cheeks. Her mind flitted between desperate prayers and jolts of outright panic. This could be it, she thought. This could be the end. Another name in the long ledger of victims of brutality. Suddenly, a chilling snarl sliced through the air. Athena, eyes ablaze, leaped onto the tall officer jaws, snapping inches from his face. She didn't bite him outright. Athena had been trained by Ebony with discipline and love, but she was a protective force of nature, warning the attacker to get off her human. The officer staggered back, surprised by the dog's fierce intervention. Apollo, not one to be outdone, charged the mustached officer, teeth bared. The baton came down in a wild swing, but Apollo dodged nimbly. The sight of these two large dogs cornering them seemed to drain the officer's bravado. They backpedaled, disoriented by the sudden onslaught. Freed momentarily from the suffocating hold, Ebony gasped for breath. Her chest burned, but a tidal wave of adrenaline fueled her next move. She scrambled to her feet, heart hammering as she realized she had a chance, however slim, to fight back. This was her home, her life, and she wasn't about to let these so-called protectors terrorize her without a fight. "Call them off!" the tall officer shouted. Sidestepping Athena's snapping jaws, sweat beaded on his forehead, his eyes flicking between Ebony and the dogs. A flicker of uncertainty crossed his face, as if he'd just realized this wasn't a routine intimidation tactic gone awry. He was dealing with living beings determined to protect one of their own. Ebony's voice trembled, but she found the courage to speak. "Back off. Get out of my house. You have no right to be here." She could hear sirens in the distance, a faint but growing wail that hinted someone else had called the police. Maybe a neighbor heard the commotion. A tiny spark of hope flared inside her. The mustached officer tried to take control, but the baton was useless against two agile protective dogs. Athena snapped at his arm, forcing him to drop the baton. He raised his hands defensively, backing away. The tall officer did the same, all bravado gone. They retreated toward the door, Ebony, keeping her distance, mind racing with the memory of every victim who didn't make it out alive. "Control your dogs!" The tall officer barked the command, but Ebony only snarled back in defiance. "You attacked me in my home," she said, voice raw. "Call for backup if you want, but you won't take me down without consequences." Outside, flashing blue and red lights strobe across the street. A second squad car screeched to a halt. The tall officer and mustached officer seemed torn between confronting Ebony and explaining to their colleagues what had happened. Athena and Apollo stood guard beside Ebony, snarling at any move the men made. In the confusion, Ebony found her phone on the kitchen counter. She managed to dial 911, heart pounding so violently it felt like it might burst. She gave her address, her voice a trembling mixture of terror and fury. "Officers just broke into my home," she gasped. "I need immediate assistance." It was a surreal moment, Ebony calling the police on the police. Yet she clung to the hope that there had to be someone among Dallas's law enforcement who would stand for what was right, who would not tolerate this vicious assault. The chaos continued at her front door. But one fact was clear. Athena and Apollo had given Ebony the precious seconds she needed to survive. Their loyalty was unwavering, a testament to the bond they shared with the woman who had saved them once before. Unbeknownst to Ebony, the night's events had already drawn eyes and ears from her neighbors. People were watching from lit windows and doorways, phones pointed at the unfolding drama, recording every moment. This attack wouldn't stay hidden in the darkness. The world was about to see exactly what had happened when racism and power collided on a quiet Dallas street, because Ebony wasn't going to let her voice be silenced. The next few hours unfolded like a slow-motion nightmare. Backup arrived, more patrol cars, more officers flashing lights painting the street in a dizzying spectacle of red and blue. Ebony stood on her front lawn, arms wrapped around herself, trembling despite the humid Dallas night. Athena and Apollo guarded her flank eyes, never leaving the swarm of uniforms. Neighbors emerged cautiously, filming from their porches and yards drawn by the commotion. Whispers mingled in the night air. "What happened? Is she okay? Why are the cops at Ebony's place?" Questions abounded, and Ebony herself had no answers. All she had was the raw memory of cold aggression. A senior officer, Lieutenant Marshall, approached Ebony, trying to exude calm. "Ma'am, can you tell me what happened here?" His tone was measured, as though speaking to a cornered animal. Ebony bristled, but forced herself to remain composed. She recounted the events, how she'd come home, how the officers broke in without a warrant, how they assaulted her, and how her dogs defended her. Lieutenant Marshall listened, his expression inscrutable. "Do you have any idea why they might have been here in the first place? Any pending cases, complaints, or—" "None," Ebony replied firmly. Her voice shook, but she kept it steady enough to convey the seriousness of her situation. "I've never had any issues with the law. Check my record. It's clean." Nearby, the two offending officers stood with sour faces, their heads close together. They spoke in hushed tones. One of them held an ice pack to his arm, courtesy of Athena's protective snap. Ebony caught slivers of their conversation. She resisted, and suspicion of illegal activity. The words ignited a spark of indignation inside her. She knew from years of reading about police misconduct that these men were likely scrambling to justify their assault. To her shock, Lieutenant Marshall asked Ebony to step aside while he questioned the officers. She watched as their conversation grew animated. The mustached officer gestured wildly toward Ebony's house, while the tall officer glowered at Ebony from under the brim of his cap. Nervously, Ebony placed a soothing hand on Athena's back. The dog looked up at her, as if to say, "I've got you." The first twist arrived when an unmarked black SUV rolled up silently, far more discreet than the flashing squad cars. A slender woman in a plain suit stepped out, her face illuminated by a street lamp. She carried herself with authority, flashing a badge at Lieutenant Marshall that Ebony couldn't quite make out from a distance. When Ebony asked a nearby officer who the newcomer was, he shrugged. But Ebony's sharp ears caught snippets of conversation. Internal affairs. Investigating claims of the rest trailed off as they moved out of earshot. Ebony's heart pounded. Internal affairs already. She hadn't even filed a formal complaint yet. Confusion and guarded hope warred within her. Perhaps someone else had reported these officers in the past, or perhaps a watchful neighbor had made a decisive call. As Ebony waited uncertain, the slender internal affairs investigator cast glances her way as though sizing her up. Ebony had the uneasy feeling she was about to be pulled into a larger web of departmental politics and hidden agendas, a realm far beyond a simple assault charge. It dawned on her that the attack might be tied to something bigger than random prejudice. But for now, all she wanted was to nurse her wounds and ensure her dogs were safe. Under the blazing floodlights, Ebony felt like a caged animal on display, her every move scrutinized and recorded. People on the street, her own neighbors, whispered in shock. The cops behind her were conferring, possibly concocting a story. The woman from Internal Affairs was likely preparing to question her, and Ebony, in the midst of it all, just wanted answers. Why had they come after her so violently? Who had set this chain of events in motion? Little did she know the night's terror was only the first step in unraveling a labyrinth of corruption, one that would reach far into the highest ranks of law enforcement and potentially drag Ebony into a life-altering fight for her own freedom. In the days that followed, Ebony found herself at the center of a whirlwind. She was summoned to the Dallas Police Department's Internal Affairs Division to give a formal statement. The slender investigator she'd seen that night introduced herself as Agent Clarissa Grant. Her voice was low and her tone was calm, but her eyes were sharp, revealing a keen intelligence that Ebony found both reassuring and unsettling. Sitting in a small interview room, Ebony felt claustrophobic. It wasn't that she had anything to hide. It was the oppressive ambiance of being in an official building, the same institution that harbored her attackers. Agent Grant offered Ebony a glass of water. Ebony accepted, if only to have something to do with her trembling hands. "Can you walk me through the events of that night?" "From your perspective," Agent Grant asked, pen poised over a notepad. She already had some details, but wanted Ebony's first-hand account. Ebony told the story again, feeling her voice shake when she recalled the moment the door was shoved open, the bruising grip on her arm, and the terrifying weight pressing her against the wall. Agent Grant listened intently, occasionally jotting down notes. She asked pointed questions. "Did they mention any ongoing investigation? Did they say why they believed you were involved in something criminal? Ebony answered as best as she could. No. They hadn't offered any explanation. No, they never showed a warrant. Agent Grant's lips thinned with each revelation. After nearly an hour, Ebony cleared her throat. Officer Grant. Sorry, Agent Grant. Why are you investigating this so quickly? I've never had any issues with law enforcement before, but I didn't think internal investigations moved this fast. Agent Grant paused, her expression softening slightly. Ms. Johnson, you're not the only person to file a complaint against these officers. There have been multiple allegations over the past year, excessive force racial profiling. We've been building a case for some time. Ebony let out a shaky breath. At least she wasn't alone. At the same time, a new wave of anger surged through her. These men had a record of brutalizing innocent civilians, and yet they were still out patrolling the streets. Agent Grant continued carefully. We believe they may be part of a broader ring of corruption within the department. Extortion planting evidence. There are rumors of them targeting people of color who live alone or have vulnerable situations. I'm not at liberty to disclose all the details, but I will say this: your cooperation is vital. A heavy silence filled the room. Ebony's heart hammered. It was one thing to have been attacked. It was another to learn she might be a target in a larger conspiracy. Could these men have targeted her specifically? Why Ebony recalled the texts from an unknown number. We need to talk. I know what's going on. She mentioned them to Agent Grant, who scribbled rapidly in her notebook. Do you still have these texts? Any contact from the same number since then? Ebony shook her head, promising to forward screenshots of the message. When Ebony left Internal Affairs, she felt simultaneously validated and terrified. The department was aware of wrongdoing, but these racist cops weren't out of commission yet. Could Ebony trust the system to protect her? A chilling thought nagged at her. In her experience, systems often protected their own. If the corruption was widespread, Ebony might be dealing with far more than just 2 rogue officers. Back at home, Ebony tried to resume a semblance of normalcy. She spent her days off doting on Athena and Apollo, who seemed unusually vigilant. The house was quiet in the Texas heat, but Ebony never felt at ease. Every creak, every passing car made her jump. She had installed extra locks and even bought a security camera. Still, the sense of vulnerability lingered. As she paced her living room one evening, Ebony remembered her grandmother's old adage. The truth always comes out, no matter how deep they bury it. It was a comforting thought, but Ebony had seen enough headlines to know that sometimes justice took too long, and sometimes it never arrived at all. Regardless, Ebony made a vow. I will not be silent. I will fight. Yet little did she know the next twists in her journey would test her resolve in ways she never imagined, forcing her to confront not just the cops who attacked her, but an entire structure bent on keeping her quiet. A week later, Ebony's life had transformed into an uneasy equilibrium of going to work, meeting with her lawyer, an old family friend named James Calloway, and cooperating with Agent Grant. Meanwhile, the 2 officers who had attacked her, identified as Officer Derek Wynne, the tall one, and Officer Martin Bell, the mustached one, remained on active duty. Ebony's lawyer explained that removing them from service required more evidence or a formal indictment, a process that could take months or years. Still, Ebony's determination only grew. She handed over security footage from her front porch camera, which had captured the moment Officer Wynne and Officer Bell forced their way into her home. The footage was grainy but damning. She also gave Agent Grant the text messages she'd received from the unknown number. James Calloway advised her to remain vigilant, suspecting harassment tactics might escalate now that Ebony had gone public with her accusations. His concerns were validated when Ebony found a threatening note wedged under her windshield wiper after her hospital shift one night. "Drop your case, or else." Her blood ran cold. She reported the threat to Agent Grant, but Ebony could see the frustration in the investigator's eyes. There were so many moving parts to this case, so many tentacles of corruption that extended far beyond just two rogue cops. Days stretched into weeks. Ebony was relieved to discover that some of her neighbors, outraged by the violence they had witnessed, had banded together to support her. They rallied on social media, circulating phone videos of the aftermath. #Justice. For Ebony began trending locally. A local news outlet, the Dallas Morning News, picked up the story. Calls demanding the suspension and indictment of Officer Wynn and Officer Bell flooded the police department. Public pressure mounted, and Ebony became the reluctant face of a protest movement calling for police reform in Dallas. Exhausted and anxious, she gave interviews and attended rallies, always flanked by Sierra Mason or James Calloway for support. She had never wanted the spotlight, but she couldn't deny the importance of shining a light on injustice. Meanwhile, Agent Grant's investigation was heating up. She uncovered evidence suggesting that Wynn and Bell had falsified reports, confiscated money from suspects without logging it, and racially profiled numerous citizens. But crucially, someone high up was shielding them. Time and again, official paperwork went missing. Complaints vanished, and contradictory statements were never followed up on. It was as if an invisible hand was steering the narrative away from them. In one tense phone call with Ebony Agent Grant, confided, "It goes deeper than I thought. We're looking at a network of officers involved in racketeering, extortion, and systematic oppression. Wynn and Bell are just the tip of the iceberg." Ebony felt sick to her stomach. What started as a singular act of violence against her was now exposed as part of a grand web of corruption. She feared for her safety for Athena and Apollo's well-being for her career. She worried about her neighbors, her community, and all the other victims who didn't have evidence to prove what happened to them. Yet there was no going back. Ebony was in the fight for better or worse. Late one evening, Ebony received another anonymous text. "Don't trust internal affairs. They have a leak." Ebony stared at the message, heart pounding. A leak in internal affairs. Did that mean Agent Grant was compromised, or was it someone else? The possibilities churned in her mind, each more frightening than the last. Despite the swirling chaos, Ebony found moments of solace at home. Athena and Apollo never left her side, sensing her heightened anxiety. In their unwavering loyalty, Ebony discovered a reservoir of courage. She realized she couldn't be silent or back down, no matter how dangerous the road ahead. If not for herself, she had to stand firm for all the people who had been silenced before her, for all the dogs she had rescued, who had taught her about second chances, and for her grandmother's legacy of standing up for what's right. Unbeknownst to Ebony, a tsunami of karma was on its way, poised to crash down on those who abused their power. And as events hurtled forward, the line between friend and foe would blur, culminating in a confrontation that would demand every ounce of Ebony's bravery. Tension came to a head on a sweltering Friday afternoon. Ebony had just finished a draining shift at Dallas General when she received an urgent text from Agent Grant. "Come to the station now. Bring your lawyer. We have developments, no further explanation." Ebony's pulse throbbed in her temples as she hastily called James Calloway, who agreed to meet her there. Stepping into the sterile corridors of the police department felt different this time. The atmosphere was charged with a sense of impending upheaval. Ebony spotted Agent Grant down the hallway, huddled with a group of officers who wore grim, determined expressions. Beside her stood a tall man in a sharply tailored suit. He turned and locked eyes with Ebony, offering a nod of acknowledgement. James Calloway whispered, "That's Captain Barnes, head of internal affairs." With Ebony's arrival, they were ushered into a conference room. Agent Grant cut right to the chase. "We've compiled enough evidence to proceed with a formal indictment against Officers Wynne and Bell," she announced, her voice tight with urgency. "Thanks to your testimony, your security footage and other victims coming forward." Relief coursed through Ebony, yet a sliver of fear remained. What now? Captain Barnes took over. "Warrants have been issued for their arrest. We also have probable cause to believe there are multiple officers involved in a cover-up. This is going to be messy, but we have a plan." He flicked his gaze to Ebony. "Your bravery has been a catalyst." Before Ebony could respond, a junior officer burst into the room, face flushed. "Captain, we've got a situation downstairs. Wynne and Bell know. They're trying to walk out of the building." A cacophony of movement followed. Captain Barnes barked orders. Agent Grant sprinted for the elevator, Ebony and James close behind. They descended to the ground floor where chaos reigned. Officer Wynne and Officer Bell stood near the exit guns drawn. A line of uniformed police formed a tense standoff with them. Ebony's heart plummeted at the sight of other officers cowering or uncertain which side to take. "They won't get away with this," Agent Grant muttered. She emerged from behind a column, hand on her own firearm. "Wynne, Bell, drop your weapons. You're under arrest." "You," Bell snarled, his eyes zeroing in on Ebony. "This is all your fault. You think you can ruin us?" His face was twisted with rage, a far cry from the smug arrogance he'd shown the night he broke into her home. Wynne shouted, "We know who's behind this. We've got friends on the inside, and we'll be out in no time." His weapon wavered, aimed indiscriminately between Ebony Agent Grant and the cluster of officers. For a moment, Ebony stood rooted by fear. Memories of that night flooding back. She recalled the suffocating weight of Wynne's knee on her back, the malicious gleam in Bell's eyes, the horrifying sense of powerlessness. But she refused to let those memories paralyze her now. Suddenly, a thunderous voice from the far side of the room. Captain Barnes boomed, "Wynne, Bell, stand down. You have nowhere to go." He stepped forward, flanked by multiple armed officers who had chosen the side of justice. A surreal hush followed. Wynne and Bell exchanged a glance, cornered animals once so certain of their impunity, now facing the reality of a system that at least this time wasn't looking the other way. In a flurry of motion, Wynne lunged for a side door. Officers tackled him. Bell raised his gun, but Agent Grant fired a single warning shot into the air. The echo reverberated, and Bell's face went pale. He dropped his weapon, letting it clatter to the floor. In the aftermath, Ebony watched as both men were handcuffed and led away. They spat and cursed, but their voices were lost in the roar of commotion. Adrenaline crashed through Ebony. She nearly sank to her knees, relief and shock mingling in a dizzying swirl. Agent Grant approached, placing a steady hand on Ebony's shoulder. "It's over," she said, but her tone suggested caution, at least for Wynne and Bell. There may still be others. Ebony nodded, tears pricking her eyes. She had fought a monstrous tide of corruption, and she'd won a vital battle. Yet she knew the war for justice was bigger than her alone. James Calloway, gently guided her out of the police station. The sun blinded her momentarily, but she inhaled a lungful of hot Dallas air and felt a weight lift off her chest. For the first time in weeks, Ebony believed that good might triumph. She had confronted racist, abusive cops and stood her ground. She had allies, her dogs, her neighbors, Agent Grant, and even part of the department that believed in doing what was right. Karma had struck Wynne and Bell hard, toppling their sense of invincibility. In the weeks and months to follow, the wheels of justice would grind, ensuring they faced the full consequences of their actions. Ebony would be a star witness, and her dogs, her fierce protectors, would remain by her side. The path ahead would not be easy, but Ebony had rediscovered her courage. This time, the system had no choice but to hear her roar. In the aftermath of Wynne and Bell's arrest, the Dallas Police Department underwent a seismic shift. A departmental shakeup saw multiple suspensions and sudden retirements of officials tied to the corruption ring. Every day brought new revelations, each more shocking than the last evidence: tampering falsified affidavits, hush money paid to silence victims. The city teetered on the edge of chaos. Yet many saw a glimmer of hope in the idea that the boil had finally been lanced, and the infection was draining away. Ebony found it surreal to watch the news and see images of officers she had once feared now carted off in handcuffs. She cooperated fully with the district attorney's office, giving detailed testimonies that helped bolster the cases against Wynne, Bell and others. The process was emotionally draining, but Ebony felt a fierce sense of purpose guiding her through it all. At home, Athena and Apollo seemed to sense the shift. Their watchful vigilance never waned, but they exuded a calmer energy. They would lounge at Ebony's feet while she spoke on the phone with Agent Grant or with journalists still clamoring for interviews. Occasionally, Ebony caught herself recalling that terrifying night, the primal fear, the adrenaline rush. But each memory now came with an aftertaste of triumph. She had survived. She had fought back. She had prevailed. Support poured in from the community. Neighbors dropped off home-cooked meals and offered to help with errands. A local animal shelter organized a fundraiser in Ebony's honor, raising money for victims of police brutality who had pets, an unexpected but deeply appreciated gesture. Even Dallas General Hospital recognized Ebony's ordeal, awarding her a special commendation for her courage outside of work. Meanwhile, the anonymous text messages ceased. Ebony sometimes wondered if the sender had been within the police department all along, someone who wanted to help but couldn't reveal themselves publicly. She considered pressing Agent Grant for details, but she sensed that might be a dead end. Some mysteries, she figured, were best left alone. Legal proceedings for Wynne and Bell dragged on, as criminal cases often do. They pleaded not guilty, citing Ebony's dogs as the aggressors and claiming they acted in self-defense. Yet the weight of evidence, security footage, witness statements, the physical evidence of Ebony's injuries was impossible to ignore. Public sentiment was also firmly on Ebony's side, making it politically difficult for the courts to minimize the charges. The trial promised to be high profile, a test of whether the justice system could be fair for a black woman seeking redress against those who had brutalized her. One bright morning, Ebony woke earlier than usual. She brewed a pot of coffee and stood on her porch, letting the mild breeze brush against her skin. Athena and Apollo flanked her, each gazing intently at the world beyond the picket fence. In the distance, the city skyline glimmered full of promise and untold stories. A sense of calm and renewal washed over Ebony. For the first time in weeks, she allowed herself to hope wholeheartedly. She had stared down the worst darkness in her life and emerged stronger. Though she still carried the emotional scars, and likely would for some time, she felt more alive than ever. Her grandmother's spirit seemed to whisper in the soft morning light, reminding Ebony that injustice thrives on silence, and that courage doesn't always roar. Sometimes it's a quiet resolve that refuses to give in. Ebony glanced at Athena and Apollo, her silent protectors, her unwavering family. She knew she would continue to fight, not just for herself, but for everyone who had been wronged and deserved a voice. Yes, a new day was dawning in Dallas, one in which the old guard of corruption crumbled under the weight of their own misdeeds, and everyday people like Ebony Johnson could stand up, speak out, and reshape the narrative. It wouldn't be perfect, and it wouldn't be quick, but it was movement, progress. And for Ebony, that was enough to keep believing in tomorrow. Ebony's story reminds us that even in the face of overwhelming odds, the fight for justice can and must prevail. When racist cops broke into her home under false pretenses, Ebony stood her ground, buoyed by her unwavering courage and the fierce loyalty of Athena and Apollo. Her bravery sparked a chain reaction, exposing a deep network of corruption and tearing away the masks of those who abused their power. If her story moved you, let it fuel your own resolve to stand against injustice wherever it appears. Speak up for those who can't hold the powerful accountable, and never underestimate the difference one person's voice can make. If you found meaning or inspiration in this story, please like, share, and subscribe to this channel. Together, we'll continue to shine a light on hidden truths and champion the courage it takes to transform our communities. Thank you for watching.